Hello everyone, this is Angela here, and today I want to talk about something a bit different. I want to talk about what it was like in my childhood, you know, um, what it was like to be a child of somebody with hoarding disorders. Now, a hoarding disorder is like what you see on the TV show called Hoarders. Um, and that's a show that's shown in the United States. I don't know about what they show in other countries with regard to it, but hoarding is basically where you have so much junk all over the place that it literally takes up every space in the house to the point where there's just a walkway with huge piles of stuff. And in the early years of my life, from the time I was born until I was about 8 years old, my grandmother, my dad's mom, and my parents were neighbors. So my grandmom used to try to get my mom to clean the house because obviously there was a problem and my grandmom was looking out for us, but my mom saw it as being intrusive. Okay, and that's kind of why my mom hated her mother-in-law, my grandmother. And if someone is new to this channel, you may want to check out my other channels, my other videos, sorry, my other video, the wedding from hell, and like the way my mom used to, because my mom's a narcissist as well as a hoarder, the just the mean things that she used to do covertly to hurt my grandmother. And but getting back to the hoarding and how it made us feel, well, the house was always cluttery, but it wasn't a hoard until I would say till I got to be around 11 years old, because my grandma moved away and we moved away too to another house, and we didn't live near each other anymore. So my mom pretty much let the house go, like really let it go. And it was out of control and it was infested with cockroaches. Um, you couldn't have people over because the house was a mess. And you also had to deal with the embarrassment of roaches. I mean, because the roaches weren't like they just came out, here and there. The place was like crawling with roaches. It was a bad roach infestation. And, you know, my parents were always fighting about the condition of the house. And it was very traumatic for me as a preteen to be growing up in that environment, because I got teased a lot at school. Uh, the neighbors didn't like us, probably because they used to hear my parents constantly fighting, and because of, like, if you looked in the windows, you could basically see, because we did have shades, but you kind of could see through, if you walked by through the corners, that the house wasn't what it should be. And then there's the doorbell dread. Well, nobody ever came to our house, but every once in a while, like, we used to have like a plumber or something come, and oh my God, it was like your heart just sank to the floor. But one of the biggest stressors of being a child of this particular hoarder was the fact that there was no fresh food, okay? The refrigerator had a lot of slop in it, and it smelled like rotting garbage. And, you know, you just couldn't keep on top of it. And basically, I don't know, I guess, you know, when something is a way of life like that, you get used to it. But you never, and I'm not saying that you enjoy it or whatever, but you can't change a hoarder's habits, okay? You can't, people, unless you're a child of a hoarder, you don't understand, okay? You don't understand the rage that they go through when you touch their stuff. And not only that, there was the other element that I had to deal with, and that was my brother, who I called the golden child. Um, like I said, nobody ate at home, okay? We were constantly, meaning myself and my sister Geraldine, were constantly wandering the neighborhood looking for some place to get something to eat. And a lot of times we used to have to walk to my grandmother's house, okay, which was about a good 45-minute to an hour walk. A lot of times we used to ride our bikes if it was summertime just to get something to eat. A lot of times grandmom used to drive us home, and sometimes she didn't, especially when she got older, because she couldn't drive at night anymore. But the whole thing was quite scary. My brother was a very intimidating person, and that was because my parents did not set boundaries with their children. And my brother was the one that ruled the roost, okay? He ruled the house because my parents were never home. My mom was always out late hours, okay, doing, she supposedly worked from 8 to 6:30 at night, 8 in the morning to 6:30 at night, and she would stroll home about 7 o'clock, and we would just be wandering everywhere. You know what I'm saying? Um, and because there was no home life, okay? We had one television, and it was a 10-inch TV, and it was in my brother's room because my brother controlled the television. Um, his room was always kept neat and clean. My room was had stuff in it, but it was cluttery, but not to the point where it was a hoard. Um, it just it just was a very, very difficult way of life. You couldn't have friends over, and the thing is, it was hard to make friends. It was hard to make friends because all the neighborhood kids knew it, okay, and they all acted like we were freaks. I guess we were. um I never seen an individual so emotionally detached to human beings, but attached to garbage like my mother. It to this day that baffles me. Um, you know, I just I can't watch the show Hoarders. I can't watch it. It just triggers me too much, and it's quite hurtful. Um, and any type of food, that we got, it was either fast food or food from neighborhood pizza shop or whatever. I did have one childhood friend. My mother talked about her in Reunion with Narcissistic Mother, and her name was Jackie Miller. And my mother was friends with her mother, who was another kookaboo, child abuser. That woman, well, I don't want to get into that story because this is about my life with my mother, with my parents. My father would always complain because his needs were not met, his clothes were not washed, the house was always dirty. They were constantly fighting about money. They were constantly, at each other's throat. And it's a wonder it's a wonder how we all survived to be adults, okay, and be halfway decently functioning. It wasn't easy. It really wasn't. And you know, it was really sad. It was really sad to grow up in that type of toxic environment. And my mother ate out too. She didn't eat, like, if she did cook something, it was slop. She would buy a box of spaghetti and put the spaghetti in the water. And by the time we came home from being out and about, from wandering the neighborhood, I would say, well, what's to eat? What's for dinner? She's like, oh, I made spaghetti. Here, I'd walk in the kitchen and it was a pot with the spaghetti, with water, with a dead roach crawling on top of, floating on, a dead roach floating on top of the water. And that's what she expected you to eat for dinner. And, it was, none of our needs were met. None of them. Even the golden child, like none of our needs were met. Um, I got teased a lot because my parents, my mother didn't groom me the way a parent should groom their child. My clothes weren't washed. I was quite disheveled looking. Going to school. Uh, the Children's Protective Services were. They didn't do anything. Nothing. Nada. And in those days, back in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, that, like, this was unheard of. Like, you never heard of such a thing. You never seen it. People didn't talk about it. It's quite difficult to go back and look at it and, and think about it. And it did cause problems in our relationship, my relationship with my mother. It's like, it's not only the narcissism, the fact that she was a narcissist, but the fact that she was a hoarder, and the fact that although she was a covert narcissist, okay, the overt aspect of her personality was that hoarding. And she used to try to hide that aspect from people. She didn't like people to know. She didn't like people to come to her house. She didn't like people to see who she really was. Okay, she didn't like that at all. Mm-mm. No. But it became difficult as I started getting into my teenage years because I wanted to have friends. I wanted to go out. I wanted to have boyfriends. I wanted people to come over. I wanted to do things like other normal teens did. And I couldn't have that because you had two people constantly killing each other, okay, at any time of the day, every time of the day. I don't even know how they took the time to make four children because they were constantly at each other's throats. And then you had this hoarding aspect. And, it's like, what boy is going to want to go out with a girl who lives in a house like that, or vice versa? I mean, even my brother, the golden child, had his issue when he was dating this girl. He went into the military. He dated this girl for 2 years. He ended up mistakenly having to bring her to our house, and as soon as she saw what she was getting into, they broke up. It's the way it was. It's the way it was. And, for that, I'm sorry, but he's got his own mental health issues, and he's got serious mental health issues, this guy. Serious mental health issues. No matter what people can say about me, I can honestly say that at least I live in the real world. I acknowledge and accept what has happened to me. And I pretty much am living a happy life. He, I don't know what he's doing, and basically I really don't care at this point. Okay, there's no relationship there. My little sister didn't experience it until after my grandmother died because she, from birth to age 13, she lived with my grandmother. And she was thrown into that environment at age 13 years old, and it was quite traumatic for her. Quite traumatic. So, yeah, if for anybody who's interested in knowing, yeah, it's very traumatic to be a child of a hoarder. And I would never want to go back, ever, you know. And that's it. So if anybody out there who's a child of a hoarder, you know how I can relate to you, and I know you can relate to me. And the only way that it's going to get better is to get away from the hoarder. That's it, because you could clean up their hoard, but they'll just replace all the stuff, and it'll turn right back to the way it was. It's the reality of dealing with these people. All right, I think I've pretty much made my point, so I'm going to wish everybody a good day and take care. Bye bye.